Good morning, everybody. It is Live with Lee and Shyamala this morning, and we are back to talk about voice AI, conversational design with Shyamala. This is a Q&A open, open Q&A period. It is early in the morning, so early. I was telling Shyamala I didn't even put my lipstick on. That's how early we are this morning. So we do have some questions this morning. I'm going to be taking my eye off the dot here for just a second as I pull questions in that we've received. So the first question up, good morning, Shyamala.
Good morning, Lee.
How was your night?
Oh, don't even ask me. I was telling you, right? I had a root canal and then the pain and all. So, yep, recovering from that.
Wow. Yeah, that kind of hurts. So the first question that we have is about your UX, or what are they saying here? So what artifacts do you use? Do you create for voice AI design?
Interesting. So, yeah, pretty much. See, when you are designing voice interactions, there are similar kind of artifacts you will create as you would as a UX designer, like wireframes and all, right? In voice, basically, you will be creating voice flows. First of all, it is like the interaction you are designing, like what is the user saying and what is the bot saying, and you are going to create the entire interaction. So, that's one thing. And voice flows are basically a Visio file. They could be Excel sheets. Different company use different formats of voice flows, and they make it work. Now, during the initial stages, however, like how you create paper prototypes or how you create, very low fidelity wireframes, the same way we create sample dialogues. So sample dialogues are basically just the basic dialogue between a user and a bot, and at that point it's just about the basic interactions and not the logics or business logics or any complex interactions. And with those sample dialogues, you're just testing the interactions, and that's like a very low fidelity. Now, as you
Can you do me a favor? Can you lower your camera a little bit so that the words aren't covering your head? There you go. So as I take notes, thanks, appreciate it. All right. So you said the voice flows. You can do that in any tool that the company prefers. What was the second one?
Sample dialogue. So sample dialogues is basically the first thing you would create, right? So sample dialogues are basically dialogues between the bot and the user, and through that you're basically creating how would the interaction flow. For example, if your uh, a use case was customer care, right? So you will create sample dialogue. First of all, what will the user say, and what will the bot say, and you will want to test it out and see how that works, and is that interaction easy enough or better enough. And once the sample dialogues are tested out and you feel confident about it, that's when you go to voice flows, and that is where you start to design, like, okay, now let's prototype it like in a Visio flow, like a flow chart. And that's where you start to think about, if the user said this, then how do I respond back? If the user is like asking the question for the first time, how do I respond? So that's where you start to think about the if then else kind of logics as well in your voice flows. We also, if this is a new product you are creating from the scratch, you are also thinking about your bot personality, because that is really important. This may not be something you will do always, but this is something you might do initially when you're creating your first interaction. So bot personality is basically, you are going to define based on your brand, company, and the company's brand values, or how they want to how they want the overall experience to be. You will create a bot personality, which is like, my bot is friendly, my bot is knowledgeable, blah blah blah, whatever is your traits, and based of that you will create some sort of personality. And with that personality, you would also create the speaking style of the bot, or you would also create some sort of standard vocabulary around how the bot would respond. Now, it's pretty much similar to how a branding person or a company's brand and tone works, right? When you have a company and a brand, you also have some sort of guidelines or style guide around, these are the words we'll use, these are the words we'll ignore, and stuffs like that. And that is where, if a brand is representing out there in social media, you would see them, it feels like it's coming from a brand, the copy and everything, whether it is for social media, whether it is for promotion, whether it is for any kind of marketing materials out there, or advertisements, right? The same kind of thing. So through your bot personality and standard vocabulary, you're basically creating that level of experience, so that if multiple people are working in the same project, you have some sort of standard around the copy, and you're not just designing whatever is coming to your mind. So there has to be. And that is why, if you see, people started branding uh, Alexa as witty, right, because of the responses. But that is something they have uh, injected the personality into the overall brand. So
So that
that's how it
sounds
goes.
like a really big part of voice AI design.
That is, and that is something which you have to work on initially. Like, that is something you have to focus on during the initial days, because until and unless you, it's like when you start a company, you have to think about the brand, you have to think about all of those kind of things. It's the same thing. It's not that every use case you would go and design the bot personality, or for maybe you will have a high level, and based of that you will work, but you don't have to. But when it comes to voice flows or sample dialogues, you have to do that each use case. Now, there may be other things as well, right? We also have to think about if your voice interactions are multimodal, which means that you also have a screen supporting, like Echo Show, or the ones in the car which comes with the screen, or your smartphones like Siri, which has a screen as well. In those scenarios, you also have to think about what to show on the screen, and what kind of visual cues and stuffs. Those are the things which are not per use case basis. Those are like initial decisions you'll be making. But then the list items, what do you show, how much you show, if the user asks for find me a nearby Starbucks, right? And what do you show? Do you just show the Starbucks, or do you show some sort of distance around that? Do you also show the rating of the Starbucks? And do you also show whether it is open or closed? All of those are business decisions, right? But those are the kind of things you have to think about as a designer, because your interaction is not just voice or dialogue, your interaction is end to end. So when the user said something, you are showing something on the screen as well, and there's like the overall experience which flows in there.
So your part in the conversational. So when you think about end to end, so that requires an awful lot of research and testing, don't you think? Or a lot of research? I mean, that. So I guess this is where the intersection of US and voice AI conversational design comes into play.
Definitely, yeah. Like I mentioned last time also, research is a big part of the entire thing. You have to do research throughout, during the initial stages, and also during the later stages. So, for example, when I was working on the Sync 4 systems, right, and we were looking at designing the interactions, we had different visual cues, and we wanted to really test it out, because we just didn't want it to give one experience to the user. So we had to do a couple of testings where we presented different visual cues to the user. We simulated the experience of the voice assistant, user saying something, bot responding, and had these different visual cues playing throughout. And then we had the user select like which one they prefer. So based on the quantity, of the users, or how many people preferred a certain kind of interaction and why, we then decided whatever the visual cues you see in the car now, because it's not just something you will do out of the blue. Everything has to be user centered, right? And so even those and the interaction. So one of the things which we were doing is, when we were designing the navigation system, for not the navigation system, but designing the point of interest use case, when the user said find me Starbucks and something. So one thing we were doing during that time was, typically in the car, you are able to show only a specific number of list items at once, because the person may be driving, right? But then we did have paginations. So we did have pagination for like 2 or 3 levels. Now, this is interesting because there's a very much blend, like you mentioned. There's some sort of blend between the UX and conversational AI, because when we were doing this, so for the test purpose, we had the user select, like a grocery store, we had a very vague experience out there, but we said like find a grocery store. So when they started doing that, we realized like people are just selecting the first or second one like in the list item and not going to the second level or third level at all. So when we asked them, they were like, well, first is from, and some people were there who were actually going to the second level, very rare, but mostly, people were in the first four results. And one thing was the familiarity. And they were like, well, I'm familiar with this grocery store, so I would rather go there. And for some people, it was like, well, whatever, it's the distance. And the first page would give me the distance. It's pretty much like search engine. You may have like 100 pages of results, but then the first page is where the biggest hit or click happens, right? So during the testing, we also try to identify these kind of experience, not just the conversational and dialogues, but also how that works with the multimodality.
Okay, I'm so glad that people like you are doing this and not me. So here's a user asking a question, which I thought was interesting. Can each user create their own vocabulary and interactions with their private smart speaker? In other words, can they program their own smart speaker to talk or answer questions in their own form?
Interesting question. So, I would say like it's like if you are saying that you are a user and you want to have a private chat with the system the way you want, that's not how it is designed right now, right? Maybe you can create your own Alexa skill or Google Actions and do that, like have your own custom. But from the end user standpoint, let's say, for example, you are a non technical person wanting to interact, you get what is being programmed or designed, right? You may have some control over the voice. You may choose, or you may have some control over, the personalization experiences, because now a lot of companies have started doing that. Like, if you want more personalized experience, you have to consent for certain things. Outside of that, you cannot create your own vocabulary saying like, hey, because I have a southern accent or southern tone, I will speak in this way, and then these are the words I will use, because those are really important points when we are designing. Because what I mentioned to you was sample dialogues and voice flows, but the bigger part of this is the language model itself. Like, how do you define the grammar, right? So we program that into the system, like these are the different ways the user can ask for certain things. Now, many people, what they do is they just go by the gut and they create a list of things initially, like these are the 10 things. So for example, I keep bringing weather. When the user says, what is the weather in Seattle, or do I need an umbrella, do I need a raincoat, or will it rain, all of these things means the same thing for the user, right? But if as a designer I have not thought about these four ways the user can ask or the same thing, and uh, you know create the language model around that, and input it into the intents and all, then the problem would be that when you ask, do I need an umbrella, the assistant would come back saying, I'm sorry, I did not get that, right?
Right.
So as a designer, we need to think about all those different ways of providing the like how the user can ask for something. That's how we make the system natural. So it's all a designer's responsibility. It's not one person. Of course, you might need a group of people to do that, but then not the user. Like, they don't have any. But yes, if the user has asked something, for example, as a user, you ask something out of the blue for weather, which was not programmed for, that's where we look into the analytics and we'll know, like, oh, okay, you know what? This is what people have been asking. So maybe we should now add it into our language model. So that's how it works.
So wait a minute. How do you know that they're asking that question?
Analytics, right? So everything has analytics nowadays. So we also have analytics, and we are capturing your voice recordings and what you said.
Wait a minute, Shyamala, wait a minute. So every time that I ask or say something to my Amazon dot, that Alexa is recording what I'm asking, right? And that gets pushed back to Amazon, who is analyzing the questions that I'm asking. And that's how, so this is where people are concerned about the privacy.
Yeah, And this is where they are concerned, like what if, not just what I asked, but also, the background noise. Let's say, for example, there were a couple of other things going on, is also recorded. And there are instances where this kind of thing has happened, right? But then typically that's how the voice assistants work, right? You have a speaker and something is being said. And like I mentioned last time as well, it's not simple, right? When you said something, you said in a audio format. So now for the machine to understand that, it anyways has to take that and interpret it into a machine readable language through the speech recognition, automated speech recognition systems. And that is where your audio is already being recorded and processed. Now the same audio is being used by the companies for analyzing, like what was said, what was interpreted, whether we support it. If we do not support, then we have to start supporting. And also for the top domains, like what is the most frequently asked use case for, right? So the same voice is being used for multiple different scenarios and different analytics, I would say, as well, throughout.
Is so now you've just got me right back to thinking about this privacy issue again. So before we go down there, I need to ask this other user's question. Actually, this is a practitioner question. And this is about approval process. When you're designing voice products versus other types of products, they want to know. I think the question is, because UX designers are always up against, a company's business objectives and personal preferences of business line owner or the economic decision maker. Do voice designers get as much pushback as a UX designer working on any other type of product?
Yes, sometimes I would say, because see, it's a very, I would say, like a very delicate kind of, blend between the UX and voice. You're pretty much doing the same thing. In user experience, you are designing experiences for screen or smartphones or mobile apps, right? And in the voice, just the modality has changed. You are designing experiences for voice, right? Or a chatbot. Nothing major has changed from the experience standpoint outside of the modality. Everything else is the same. You still have to think about the user experience. So the kind of pushbacks you may get, like, why did you have this button here, or why did you like have this, why are we using this kind of messaging? The same kind of thing happens even with voice, right? When you are designing the overall thing, you will get the same kind of pushback, like, okay, why are we saying this thing? Why are our messages so long? For example, you have to create strategies around first time versus returning users. So I had a lot of pushback when I was trying to say, like, for returning users, we might have to taper some of the experience. So for example, in the initial experiences, we have like, how can I help you? So I was like, well, every time if you're saying how can I help you, it's not helping the user, because maybe I'm using the assistant for the first time. I don't know what you can do for me. So then if you give me some options, it will be helpful for me. So then we decided, like, we'll have something like, how can I help you? Or we had something like, hello, I'm your I'm your voice assistant, and I can help you with playing music or calling someone or finding a point of interest. What would you like me to do? Right now, if I'm a returning user, that's too much information for me, just going on and on with the same thing, because I already know that. So it feels very dumb for the users. So I had to push back that for the returning users, we will have to taper the prompt. So instead of saying something like what I just mentioned, we can just say, hey, how can I help you, or what can I do for you? So now the biggest problem was like, at what level we will know, and especially with the vehicle, right? It's too much. First of all, it's your own vehicle. And the second thing was like, maybe you have used it regularly, maybe I'm using it for the first time. So how would we even know who's the first time user versus returning to taper, and when to taper, when not to taper? So I had a lot of pushback back and forth for this thing, like, the tapering strategy might not work in this case, because we cannot assume and design. So there are these kind of things. Then you have to go back and think about strategies, like, okay, what should we do? How do we identify the first time versus returning? Can we use voice biometrics to do that, or should we have some other strategy? So it's the same kind of pushbacks which you'll be doing. So we cannot, like you mentioned, we cannot assume and design. We have to really, and that's where you might be doing testing, or you might be looking at other statistics, or you might be looking at other experiences, what others are doing and how they've been thinking about. So it's a combination of things. So pushback will always be there no matter what you're designing, and you have to be ready to defend yourself with data.
So defending yourself with data makes total sense, but I think that what you just said is the number one pushback when internal stakeholders are making recommendations and suggestions that don't make sense. They're assuming about the user. So if we just said to them, we can't assume in design, this is what our data shows from actual users.
Yes.
And that ends that argument.
Yeah.
Right there. Unless, of course, you're somebody like Steve Jobs who can see into the future, or has this uncanny ability to identify what the users don't even know what they want, right?
Yeah.
So how does that work, Shyamala? I mean, when you've got somebody like that you're working with that insists that designers will like this, can't we just test that first before we go to market with their concept?
We always do the testing. None of our products go out without testing, and I like doing testing at every stage of design. So, like I mentioned, I mean, I'm one of those designers who would do testing even in the initial stages of paper prototyping. When I was into UX, I would just take the paper prototypes and run it with the users. Now, that version of testing in the voice translates to Wizard of Oz testing. So that is where I would have some pre-recorded videos, audios, and then I would have the experience. And here also, I've done the same kind of thing. I had the interactions or the templates on the paper, but I had the audios played back to the user, and we were simulating the experience. So, or it could just be like playing the voice prompt, the sample dialogues to the user. So you definitely have to keep testing out throughout in order to make sure you are creating a more data driven and user centered, because we cannot assume and design, especially
Yeah.
when it comes to any kind of design. But with voice it's more, because voice is so natural. What you said can be interpreted wrong if it is not said in the right way, right? So we
Yeah.
need to really make sure that the meaning is not getting lost because of how we have written it or
Yeah.
designed it. So I do testing at different stages, during the initial and during like the advanced stages before the vehicle is out for the end users. So yeah, you have to keep testing, you have to go back, you have to fix things, you have to again go back and then look at what's happening where. So like I mentioned, visual cues were one of the things, right? So when we were testing the point of interest, we also identified the way some of the messaging was prompted to the user was not really being helpful. So we had to go back and fix some of those as well. So it's an ever evolving kind of thing. Now, with a website or a mobile application, you might just be doing that once, right? You'll go through this entire cycle, and once your application is out, that's it. Maybe through analytics, you might be improving some of the things, but not like very regularly or ongoing basis, but you'll start focusing on new features. But with voice, it's like even when your application is out, the voice application or the voice feature is out, you'll still be collecting more and more data and constantly working on it, because maybe you have prototyped the system, and the language model suggests like, okay, the language model was designed with 10 different kind of utterances. Now the users have been asking for more and more things, and you want to make sure you're supporting those utterances as well. So you might have to go back and add those things. Or you identified out of the 10 different features which you have, only two are being used the most. And this happens, Alexa has 100,000 plus skills now. But then if you look at the top used skills, you would see timer, music, or I think these are the two which are used the most, right? So what about the others? How do you now think about discoverability? What is happening? So as a designer and your team, you're looking at those strategies over and over again, and now looking at, okay, these are the only two domains which are being used. What about the third one? Why is it not being used? Now how do I introduce discoverability into the experience so that people know there are new features existing? Maybe people are interested but they don't know where to discover that, or maybe people don't want to. So you have to constantly knock your head around all of these things to improve the experience constantly. So it's not that once the product is out, it's out. You have to constantly keep improving on that through data.
Wow. All right. So, which brings me to my we're gonna, you know what, we're gonna spend one session talking about the ethics and principles about voice design, because so many questions come to mind on that. But we have someone here. You started a school called Digital Assistant Academy to help groom more voice designers, right? Because you know that this is an area that you're going to need help with, right? You're going to need boots on the ground, and you know that there's a big demand for this. So one of our questions is, what does career progression look like in voice design? So the question really comes from, after they were looking at DA Academy, they're like, okay, where does that get me in voice design profession?
So yeah, very interesting question. So see, pretty much like what you're doing currently, right? As a UX designer, you may be a UX designer first of all, then you may become a strategist, or you may decide to become a product manager or a product owner, or you may decide to go some other route. With the voice, it's the same kind of thing. First of all, you start with a conversational designer. Maybe now when you're confident, you start to if you have people management skills, maybe you will become a manager or director. Like, I know my friend Celine, she has a big team of IVR designers at 24/7, and she does that. She has a big team and she manages all of those people, also make sure the product is going live with the right kind of quality and experience. So because you understand the technical aspect of things, you understand the experience aspect of things. As a conversational designer, that could be one route. Or you could just progress from one modality to the other, if that is the route you want to go. Or you can become a product owner, like what I did. I started as a conversational designer and moved into ownership, where I'm defining and designing the vision for the product and thinking about the now, near, and far. So there's a lot of aspects like these. You can become a strategist, you can become a manager, and so it's like the same kind of progression like you would have in any career. It's up to you what level you want to go with advancements in all these different companies. You can definitely, and even another beauty with this is you can also get into analytics side of things, like data scientist kind of part of things here, because there's a lot of data being collected. You're constantly looking at the natural language piece of things as well. So if you're not good at writing, maybe you want to just dice and slice the data and improve the product constantly. Or you can become a researcher solely focusing on the voice part of things and designing the experience testing, because voice testing is slightly different than the normal testing out there. You may do the same kind of usability testing, but it might be different. So you can become a whole and soul researcher. I know one more person who's the head of research, and her focus has been solely on like voice and doing the research for the voice. Again, the same kind of things: what works for users, what doesn't work for the user, the experiences, and researching everything, creating the strategies around it. So it's pretty much similar to other disciplines, I would say.
Uh-huh. Okay, so let me just remind our audience, who's ever watching currently or post, I am not a Shyamala. I am a advocate for user experience and voice conversational AI designers and the practice and the people who do it. But this is it sounds like it's a little bit different. So if the testing is a little different for voice, there's got to be some other aspects of it that might have some unique qualities to it. So we might explore that on another call. But our 30 minutes is almost up. So we've got less than a minute to go. So the last question that we have is from Chris. Hey, Chris, do you prototype outside a design app to capture conversation flow, such as BotMock or other chatbot prototype tools?
Yeah. So I would say, like, we do that as well. In the past, we used Excel sheets and we used Visios, but now we use tools like VoiceFlow to prototype the experience because that makes it quicker to create the prototypes and test it out with the end users, because you can send the users the link. So these kind of prototypes, what we design, are helpful during the initial stages of design, or when we are designing the initial flows. But then if we really have to test out in the vehicle, that's where, like, it has to be deployed in the vehicle to test out the context and other kind of issues as well. So I would say, like, yes, we do use VoiceFlow, and we've used Botmark and other kind of tools as well.
Nice. Okay. And Chris, we're going to close out this half hour with this. And I would love some user feedback from you guys. Is once a week enough? Would you prefer every other week? Would you prefer once a month with Shyamala? Or would you just prefer to work alongside Shyamala and just, put a syringe into her head and download all that data? So I'm curious about our users and our followers. So if you could give us some feedback, I'd greatly appreciate it. All right, Shyamala, another day down. Chris says thanks. Thank you, Chris. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody. Shyamala, thank you again for joining us. Great day, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, Lee. Take care.